Hey everybody, it's Professor Parish, and welcome back to English 122, Week 11. So we are in the midst of drama right now, and we have just gone over the preview chapter. I know I posted the video a little bit late this last week, so if you've not watched the Week 10 video, please make sure that you go do so. You can pause this video, cancel out of it, watch it later, but make sure you've watched Week 10 first, because I go over the paper 3 guidelines, I go over our first chapter of drama, I set a lot of things up that I'm going to talk more about this week when we go over Greek Tragedy and Shakespeare. So it's not going to be an insanely long video, don't worry, but make sure that you've watched those other videos first so that you get a little bit of preamble before watching this one. I am nearly completed with grading paper 2. The poetry paper usually takes me a little bit longer to get through because it's a quite unique paper compared to what else we do in the class. So I'm almost finished with those. You should get some feedback by tomorrow on those if you don't already have feedback. The revision due date is going to be November 3rd if you choose to revise. So far, for the most part, everybody has done a really good job on the poetry paper. I think if you've not gotten the grade that you want, it is probably because you either didn't include a poem, which you were supposed to, or you don't have long enough of an analysis, or maybe you don't have an intro and conclusion. They're just very easy, fixable things. So far, the students that I know will probably revise. They're just very simple fixes. They shouldn't take you that long, and then you can always email me your revisions. So without any further ado, I am going to go ahead and talk about the assignments this week, and then we're going to talk about Greek Tragedy and Shakespeare because they go hand in hand. And then next week, we're going to finish up with talking about American drama and comedy. So let's go ahead and I'll minimize myself on here. Down here now, woo. Let's go ahead and talk about, I'm recording this on Sunday night, so if you have not completed the assignments for week 10, please make sure that you get your thesis statement and discussion forum number 10 completed. So for this week, we obviously have this video. We are going to talk about Greek tragedy and Shakespearean drama. We're going to watch this video, obviously. Hopefully you have. And then in the concise Cengage handbook, I know I've not discussed that fluidly. It's a resource that's going to come up when we get to paper 4. But for right now, page 362 and 380 are just reviewing finding information. So it's going over library resources, things like that. So if you did not look at that section in English 121, I would highly suggest you taking a look at those pages this week, familiarizing yourself. We are going to eventually talk about MLA with that textbook, so just make sure you're familiar. And then the only assignment due by Friday is going to be your week 11 discussion forum post. And then by Sunday, you have 2 responses, your outline for paper 3, and reading response number 4. This will be our last reading response. I know, shed your tears now, just deep breaths, it's gonna be okay. So let's talk about, speaking of which, let's talk about reading response number 4. So this is, as I said, our last reading response that we will do in this class. We're going to finish out the reading responses this week. And I've got some guidelines right here, and I'm going to pull them up to show you all what they look like. This assignment is due by Sunday. So what we're going to do is, I have 2 videos here. One is, we don't have time to read a whole play in this class because you're already, as I discussed in last week's video, you're already looking at a play for paper number 3. So we just don't have time to devote to reading an entire play outside of the one you're doing for your paper. It just doesn't work out. I tried it one year, it didn't work. No one had time to do it. So as an English teacher, it pains me to say that this is going to be a resource, but I have 2 videos here. They're both found on YouTube. One is actually from, the Hamlet video is actually from Cliff Notes, which is like, ugh. Just saying the word Cliff Notes as an English teacher is like, ugh. And the other one is actually a student-created video about Antigone. So both of these videos summarize the plot of each of these plays. So if you have read Antigone and Hamlet in high school, then a lot of this is going to be review, and you're probably going to be like, oh yeah, that happened, I remember that. But if you, like me, did not read Antigone in high school, because I did not, I did read Hamlet in high school, but if you have not read Antigone or Hamlet before, then these videos are going to save you a lot of time in reading the actual plays. Now, I will forewarn you, the Antigone video is not bad. A woman does the narration for the Antigone video, which makes sense because our protagonist in Antigone is a female. So she does a really good job. I'm not gonna lie, Cliff Notes hired the most dry, boring man to read the synopsis for Shakespeare's Hamlet. However, he is very thorough, so if you don't want to miss any important details, this guy's got you covered. But I will go ahead and apologize. He's really dry. So if you want to crank up the volume and play this while you're doing the dishes or driving in your car going somewhere or cleaning your house, you just want to have this playing in the background, I don't blame you. But anyway, the point is, please watch both of these synopses. And then after you've watched both videos, your reading response will answer the following questions. So, what defining term from our textbook on Greek sections on Greek tragedy and Shakespearean drama can be applied to both of these plays? Meaning, from the two chapters we're going to talk about in this video, what term do you think would apply best to Antigone, and what term do you think would apply best to Hamlet? It can be the same term, but it just needs to be a term from our textbook, and how does it apply? So, for example, if you're going to pick the term protagonist, how would you apply the term protagonist to Antigone, and how would it be different in Hamlet? The protagonists in those plays are quite different. Question 2, these two plays are written in different time periods, but they have a lot in common. So compare and contrast the two plays. How are the plots similar? How are they different? What about the relationships between Haman and Antigone and Hamlet and Ophelia? So it's just saying, how do you compare and contrast the relationships in each of these plays? How are the plays in general similar and different? Because there are quite a bit that's similar between them, but there's also a lot that's different. Question 3, if Antigone was a Shakespearean play, because it's a Greek play, if it was a Shakespearean play, would it be different? Explain your answer. And on 3 and 4, don't just say, no, or, yeah, it'd be different. I want you to explain. So if you don't think that it would change, explain to me why. Why wouldn't it be different? And explain that answer. And likewise with number 4, if Hamlet was a Greek tragedy, what would change, if anything, and explain. So if you're like, oh, nothing would change, then explain how it fits into the realm of a Greek tragedy. That's the answer I'm looking for. So again, I'm going to be able to tell whether or not you watched this video if you email me and ask questions about this reading response. I'm going to be like, look, this is outlining your answers and what they should look like. And then your responses are due by Sunday in the Dropbox. So we're going to finish our reading responses with a bang. We're going to go out with a really good reading response. They should be a page total, double-spaced in terms of content and length. But I think that if you've read these two plays, then you'll definitely see the connections between them. And if you haven't, then after you watch these videos, you'll probably see that as well. So that's reading response number 4. And that's the Dropbox for it. Our discussion forum for this week, and this is what I was talking about again in week 10. There are 3 short videos here, and by short I mean they're like 3 to 5 minutes each. They're not very long at all. But John Malkovich, he's a pretty famous actor. You'll know who he is once you see him in the video. He talks about, he's a theater-based actor. He grew up in theater and plays, and he talks about the differences between theater and film and what that's like. So, and then the other videos talk about the Globe Theater, they talk about Shakespeare, about plays in general. So definitely give those videos a watch and then answer the 3 questions for the discussion forum. So a lot of videos this week to watch, but I think that makes it a little more entertaining. It's something a little more outside the box. And then finally we have our outline for paper 3, and so far the theses that I've seen for paper 3 look great. As long as you're picking a play, you should be fine. But I want to see the outline of your paper. What are you specifically going to talk about in your paper. And again, like we've talked about with our other outlines, these are not set in stone. So you can change these outlines after you submit this assignment. I just want to know that you have an outline in place to start your paper, because we don't have a lot of time with this paper like we have with fiction and poetry. So I want to make sure now that you've got a game plan put in place, so that you're not trying to do this play at the last minute. But that's pretty much it for that. The reading response and the outline are both due Sunday. Your discussion forum post I would do first. That's due Friday night, and then you can wait to do your peer responses either Sunday, or you can do them Friday night too, because everybody's got a post by then. So just kind of keep that in mind. But the rest of this video, we are going to talk about Greek tragedy and Shakespearean drama. So I'm going to go to my resources and handouts over here, and I'm going to scroll down to week 11. One other thing too, before we discuss the drama presentation, we're just looking over slides 6 through 9 this week, so we don't have a lot of slides to go over in the rest of this video. I do have an example of paper 3 that I want to show you. I posted this former student's example. It is just, it's from about a year ago, but it's literally just about death of a salesman. The reason why I picked this example is because, one, they have in-text citations throughout. Note, they have Bloom 2 here. They have in-text citations. But they also do formatting correctly, and they talk about death of a salesman to a fair extent. This is not the best drama paper I've ever read, but it is a nice, solid example of one that works. It's 3 to 5 pages. It has good in-text citations. And if you notice at the end, they have cited the play and the book and our textbook very correctly. Everything is cited perfectly in this example. So if you're wondering about how to do citations, especially how to cite our book, you can use this paper as an example. It's just a solid paper. It's not extraordinary. It's not the best paper I've ever read, but it's a really good, solid drama paper. So you can look at that for example number 3 there. But the rest of this video, we're going to talk about chapters 27 and 28. Ta-da! You want to play this example. Okay. So, Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy is chapter 27, and we start with Greek tragedy because it's probably the earliest documented form of drama that we have to go off of, at least in Western culture. And so the idea behind Greek plays was that it's nothing like what we think of today. Greek plays at the time were very much just a small group of people. They had a chorus, and we'll talk about the chorus in a minute. There was a chorus, there was a group of actors, and it was very much just on a flat or slanted, elevated stage, and it was very minimal. The costumes were just robes. They would use giant papier-mâché, elaborate masks and props to show difference between characters, because if you think about it, they were performing for a large audience, and some of those audience members could not see far back away. Or it'd be like if you were at a concert and you're like squinting to see the band, and you're like, I think that's the lead singer. It's kind of one of those things. So they'd wear these giant masks and props on their heads to make themselves stand out. But costume-wise, it was just mainly robes. It was very minimal. There was no set changes, not very props outside of their costumes. It was all very, very, very minimalist. And so it's very different than what we think of as plays today. The terminology in our chapter, we start out with the term the messenger. And if you've ever heard the phrase, don't shoot the messenger or don't kill the messenger, Greek tragedy is where that term and that phrase comes from. Because the messenger is usually the person that delivers bad news to a character in a play. Technically, the messenger is just the character delivering news, but in a Greek tragedy, it's usually bad news. It's usually not anything that the main characters want to know. The term genre was developed through Greek tragedy. Genre just refers to a type of writing, and we've seen this term thrown out all over nowadays. I mean, you have genres of music, you have genres of TV shows, of movies, of books, genres of subject matter. I mean, there's just a lot that genre covers anymore in our culture and vernacular. In a play, there is the complication. And the complication is the starting conflict, the problem that arises that springs action into the actual play itself. So, for example, in Disney's Hercules, and I'll use Hercules as an example because it's easy, Hercules is the complication is that Hercules figures out that he's adopted. That starts the conflict. So he figures out he's adopted, and his parents are like, you need to go up to Mount Olympus and figure out where you're from. And that is the starting conflict where he starts, and then he discovers that Zeus is his father, and things kind of unravel from there. The denouement, and I used to call it the denouement before my uncultured self was taught how to properly pronounce this word. The denouement is the unraveling of the plot towards the climax. And that's basically all the events. We called it in the fiction unit, we called it the rising action. The denouement in a play is how the plot just keeps moving forward and forward and forward towards a climax, and then it will lead to the resolution. So the denouement is that unraveling of things as the play goes along. The peripety is the twist in the story, often towards the climax. And usually if there's a suspense or thriller, it's when the story suddenly takes a dramatic shift, or a new piece of information is revealed to the audience that changes everything. So recently, SIC performed Little Shop of Horrors. In that play, the peripety or the twist would likely be when we find out that Audrey 2 is actually wanting to take over Earth. That would be the twist in the story. Like, oh no, the plant is actually evil. And the peripety doesn't have to be something that's shocking, but it's the twist in the story that changes the way, because before, if you ever saw Little Shop of Horrors, or if you were in the play, before, the plot is very much Seymour and Audrey 2. Seymour's trying to get Audrey to be his girlfriend, to be his love interest. And so that's been what this story has been building up to, and Seymour has been using Audrey 2 to gain momentum and through various actions to get to that point. The twist is when we find out that Seymour's not going to accomplish that goal. That goal's just not going to work for him. And the story takes a turn and twists to a new climax, and that's peripety. And then catharsis is at the end of the Greek tragedy, when all of the feelings are purged from the characters. Greek tragedies typically ended terribly. People died. There was just this sense of emptiness at the end of them. And catharsis was that purging of emotions so that the characters were like, I'm out. It's that SpongeBob meme where he's like, I'm a head right out right now. Like, it's that meme. That's catharsis. It's like, nope, done. No more. Can't do this. But that's pretty much Greek tragedy. Now, typically, Greek tragedy characters had a fatal flaw. There are a lot of characters in Greek tragedies that seem like they are perfect characters, except for this one personality trait that is absolutely fatal. Achilles, if you've ever heard of Achilles' heel, his heel is his tragic flaw. Mostly, though, they weren't physical flaws that were the problem. It was all very internalized character flaws, and the biggest of which was hubris, which is your pride. Characters were too proud, and that caused their downfall. Again, we've talked about the myth of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun because he was too proud of and arrogant, and that was his downfall. A lot of Greek tragedies end with the characters realizing that their pride has cost them everything. For example, Oedipus. If you've not read Oedipus, it's a fun little romp about self-prophecy and about pride and arrogance and its ultimate downfall. When you watch Antigone is basically the sequel to Oedipus. It's what we could almost call the very first fan fiction in our modern civilization, because Oedipus's whole story is that it's about a prince who's born, and it's prophesized by this oracle that Oedipus is going to grow up, kill his father, and marry his mother. Obviously, his parents are freaked out about this, so they say, you know what, we're gonna outdo prophecy, we're gonna outsmart it, and we're just gonna send our son away, and then it'll never happen. And their hubris causes their downfall, because rather than just keep Oedipus around and, maybe raise him up and tell him about this prophecy and be like, hey, maybe you shouldn't kill us and marry your mom. Instead, they're like, no, we're going to outsmart prophecy and we're going to send him far away. And what ends up happening is that Oedipus grows up not knowing his parents, and he decides to travel, and he ends up traveling towards the kingdom he's from, and along the way he meets his father on the road, and neither of them know who each other are, and Oedipus ends up killing his father after an argument, and then he's like, oh, I killed the king of this kingdom, well, I'm going to go check this kingdom out. He does, and he's like, man, this woman, she's a lot older than me, but I'm really attracted to her, and he ends up marrying her and having kids. And the mom doesn't know that that's her son. Greek tragedy. And then at the very end of the play, the oracle arrives back and he's like, by the way, as the messenger, he arrives back and says, yeah, by the way, Oedipus, that woman that you married is your mom. And those kids you had are like your inbred kids. And Oedipus, who's horrified, ends up stabbing his eyes out and dies. Greek tragedy. It's a fun time. So, but anyway, the point of the play is just that the parents were so arrogant and proud that they could outsmart prophecy that they really did a terrible thing, and they ended up just fulfilling their own doom and demise. And Antigone is actually one of Oedipus's children. So the story continues on with her and her siblings, and they're supposedly cursed, and there's all of this surrounding it. But when you watch the video for the reading response, you'll get all the synopsis there. Pathos. In English 121, we've talked about pathos. It's in Greek, it literally means suffering. If you were in English 121, you probably heard of pathos or pathos as meaning an emotional persuasion. And in Greek, it just literally means suffering. It's completely emotional. And a lot of Greek tragedy has lots of pathos. And then we have antagonist versus protagonist. And again, we've talked about this in the short story unit. It's not really good versus evil, it's just main character versus obstacle. And a lot of Greek tragedies have a very powerful antagonist for their protagonist to deal with. Whether it's literal or whether it's the prophecy itself, it's a figurative antagonist. So, Shakespeare, who is possibly one of the famous, if not the famous playwright, most famous playwright, he drew a lot of inspiration from Greek tragedy. He read a lot of Greek tragedies, he read a lot of Greek plays, and he took a lot of inspiration from them and basically just added on to what a Greek tragedy was. Because if you've ever read a Shakespearean play, especially his revenge tragedies or his other more somber plays, you're like, man, this reads like a Greek play. And that's because he draws a lot of inspiration from them. But he added things and changed the way that we view plays in a lot of ways. And in our discussion forum post, there's a video that you'll watch about the Globe Theater. So I won't talk too much about it because if you watch that video, it's going to explain the Globe Theater and how that revolutionized the way that we watch plays and interact and audibly hear plays. But in terms of their construction, he introduced a few new terminologies, a few new terms. One of them is stage business. Stage business involves fast-moving props, set changes within a play. Because keep in mind, before Shakespearean times, Greek plays did not have a lot of props. There weren't set changes. You were just on a blank stage. And Shakespeare's like, no, we need to create an environment and an experience. So they would have set changes. They would have elaborate costumes and props. And he just made all these things happen, and that's called stage business. He also created genres within drama. So the intrigue, the suspense play, the revenge tragedy, which is literally Hamlet, Macbeth, etc. He kind of created those little subgenres that we now know today. An intrigue is a mystery, suspense, or thriller. It's not a horror, it's not scary, but it's not just drama, it's very psychological. And then revenge tragedy, Hamlet's probably the most famous of that genre because it's literally just about Hamlet getting revenge for his father's death and all the bad things that happen afterwards. Mythology. Shakespeare draws heavily from mythology. He draws from classic Greek tales and legends. So if you ever read a Shakespearean play and you think to yourself, this seems a lot like Oedipus or like Hercules or something like that, then it probably is. He's drawing a lot of inspiration. Shakespeare often wrote his plays in blank verse, which is a poetic type of writing a play. I can't imagine how hard and how much time it would have taken him to write a play, a screenplay, using blank verse, which is just unrhymed, iambic pentameter. So it's like counting out your syllables, counting out your stressing on there. It's wild. It's absolutely wild that he was able to do that so effectively in a lot of his plays. And then I love this term colossal protagonist, because when you hear colossal, you instantly think Greek. You think like Colosseum, you think like Hercules, you think of like this mythical term, but Shakespeare actually is the one that coined it. And it's when a main character overshadows all other characters. This is not a common term, because there's a lot of stories where this doesn't happen. Like if you think of Harry Potter, you probably think of Ron, Hermione, Draco Malfoy, Neville. You think of other characters. But now if I ask you, other than Hamlet, name me some characters. You're probably going to think of Ophelia, his love interest. Maybe Claudius, who's the uncle. Anybody else? Laertes? The point is that Hamlet, when Shakespeare wrote a lot of his plays, he had to draw in the masses. And to draw in the masses, he needed to have a term, a character that was a central focus. That's what the audience remembered. Because keep in mind, there's no social media in Shakespeare's times. There's no Facebook. The printing press is rarely a thing. The way of distributing media is so limited that he had to have something to draw people to his plays. And word of mouth was one of his greatest strengths in that regard. So if he could have people leaving going, have you seen Hamlet? Oh yeah, Hamlet. It's about this king. And he is bent on revenge, and etc., etc. As long as they remembered the main character of his play, that's what mattered to Shakespeare. And Hamlet is a colossal protagonist. He overshadows so many other characters. I mean, I remember Rosencrantz and Guildenstern because of the extra modern updates and, kind of spin-offs, things like that. But a lot of his plays, like Macbeth, who's the other characters in Macbeth? Name me one other character in Macbeth other than Macbeth, right now. It's hard, isn't it? And that's because Shakespeare wanted his characters to be remembered. Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, you remember Mercutio, and you can remember a few other characters, but Romeo and Juliet stand out, as do Macbeth, as do Hamlet. And the idea behind that was that they were colossal protagonists that the audience would easily remember and be able to spread quickly through word of mouth without having to sit there and go, oh yeah, the play's about this guy, what's his name, you automatically knew because they were such an influential and over-the-top, eccentric, larger-than-life character. So that's what a colossal protagonist is. And on page 1371, there's a section in our textbook called Juxtapositions, and I really, really like this. They do it for Hamlet, and they do it for a couple other plays in our book. But the idea is that there's various authors who have read Hamlet, and they offer a different spin on it. So if you look on page 1371, you're going to see someone do juxtapositions on Hamlet through a psychological lens. Like now, most modern-day literary scholars believe that Hamlet's character suffers from a disorder, and they can literally pinpoint, like through the DMV, different examples of that disorder and how they come to light in the text. And back then, Shakespeare didn't know what that was called. There was no term for it. But now you can kind of see the different symptoms and overlying features that you'd be like, oh yeah, Hamlet totally has this. He's totally this type of person and has this going on. So there's one on that. There's one on looking at Hamlet through a feminist perspective by looking at Ophelia, because she's a pretty dramatic yet weak character, in my opinion. And there's just different facets that you could look at Hamlet through. And so I want you to look at that section and kind of see how different people analyze Hamlet, because that could be an idea that you do for paper 3. You could examine a play through a certain lens or through a certain point of view or perspective. And that's just one option if you need it. All right, so that's where we're going to end off today. We're going to end off today and then finish next week by looking at both comedy and American drama. We're going to finish off there, but definitely give your book a look. Check out your book. See the Shakespearean plays that are listed in there. See the Greek tragedy. Just make sure to watch the videos this week. I know that they do take time, but the videos for the discussion forum and for the reading response are going to be extremely helpful, and they will help establish some information about drama that will kind of go along with the rest of our unit. So, as always, you can always email me with questions. You can stop by my office. I'm going to be in and out. So, if you want to make sure I'm going to be around, just send me an email. But you can call. You can send me a message. Just let me know if you have any questions. But I am finishing up paper 2 tonight. And so you should have those back by tomorrow to look at. All right. As always, I look forward to reading your work. And I'm excited to see what you all are going to talk about for paper 3. Have a great week, everybody. I'll talk to you all soon.